In this story, you'll hear how a simple evening at home led to a confession that shattered a family's world. My name is John, and I'm 35 years old. I live in a quiet suburb of San Jose, California, with my wife Emily and our 3 kids, Lily, who's 8, Jack, who's 6, and Emma, who's 4. I work as a construction worker, and Emily is a marketing manager. We've been married for 10 years, and I always thought we were solid, until that evening. I remember coming home early from work one Friday. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over our neighborhood. I was looking forward to a relaxing evening with my family. As I stepped through the front door, I could immediately sense something was off. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of tea, staring blankly out the window. "Hey, Em," I greeted her, trying to keep my voice light. "How was your day?" She didn't look up. "John, we need to talk," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. My stomach tightened. I sat down across from her, my mind racing with all the possibilities. Maybe it was about the kids. Maybe something had happened at work. But nothing could have prepared me for what she said next. "John, I've been seeing someone else," Emily said, finally meeting my eyes. "His name is Mark. He's 27, and he's a cryptocurrency trader." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I stared at her, waiting for her to say it was a joke, a mistake. But she just looked at me with that same blank expression. "You're kidding, right?" I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "No," she replied, shaking her head. "I want to keep seeing him, John. I think we should have an open relationship." I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. Emily and I had our ups and downs, like any couple. But this? I couldn't wrap my head around it. The room started to spin, and I had to grab the edge of the table to steady myself. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why are you doing this?" Emily sighed, looking away. "I don't know, John. I feel like I've changed. I need something more." I sat there, numb, as she talked about Mark and how he made her feel alive. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make her understand what she was doing to our family, but all I could do was sit there, feeling my world collapse around me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily with Mark, laughing, smiling, living a life without me. I felt a deep, gnawing pain in my chest. I kept wondering what I had done wrong, why I wasn't enough. The next morning, I stumbled through my usual routine, getting the kids ready for school, making breakfast, trying to keep it together. But every time I looked at Emily, I felt a wave of anger and hurt wash over me. How could she do this to us? To our family? Later that day, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the clock radio on the mantel. The seconds ticked by, each one a reminder of the life I thought I had. I felt the anger building inside me, and before I knew it, I grabbed the radio and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, the pieces scattering across the floor. Emily came downstairs, her expression unchanged. She looked at the mess, then at me. "Was that really necessary?" she asked, her voice cold. "Was this necessary?" I shot back, my voice shaking with rage. "What about us, Emily? What about our family?" She shrugged. "I don't know, John. Maybe this is just how things are meant to be." Her indifference was like a knife in my heart. I turned away, unable to look at her. How had we come to this point? How had everything fallen apart so quickly? That night, I sat alone in the dark, trying to make sense of it all. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. All I knew was that I couldn't go on like this. Something had to change. But what? And how? The days following Emily's revelation were a blur. I felt like I was moving through a fog, just going through the motions. At work, I found myself making careless mistakes, and at home, I struggled to keep it together for the kids. The weight of Emily's betrayal was crushing, and I couldn't shake the feeling of worthlessness that had taken hold of me. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I found myself in the garage, staring at my toolbox. Fixing things had always been my way of dealing with stress, but this time, the usual solace wasn't there. I picked up a wrench, turning it over in my hands, trying to make sense of everything. "John?" Emily's voice broke through my thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk." I sighed, setting the wrench down. "What now, Emily?" "I think we should tell the kids," she said, crossing her arms. "They need to know what's going on." I felt a surge of anger. "And what exactly are we going to tell them?" "That their mom wants to have her cake and eat it too." "Don't be dramatic," she replied, rolling her eyes. "They deserve to know the truth." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "Fine, but we're not telling them until we have a plan. I don't want them to be scared or confused." Emily nodded, a hint of relief in her eyes. "Okay, we'll wait." As she walked away, I felt a pang of sadness. This wasn't the life I had envisioned for us, for our kids. I had always imagined growing old with Emily, watching our children grow up in a happy home. But now, that dream seemed impossible. The next day, I called in sick to work. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do next. I spent the morning sitting on the porch, sipping coffee and staring out at the street. Neighbors walked by, waving and chatting, their lives seemingly perfect. I felt a pang of envy. Why couldn't my life be that simple? I decided to reach out to my best friend, Mike. We'd known each other since high school, and he was the one person I could always count on. I sent him a text, asking if he had time to talk. Within minutes, my phone rang. "Hey, John." Mike's voice was warm and familiar. "What's up? You okay?" "No," I replied, my voice cracking. "I need to talk. Can you come over?" "I'll be there in 10, he said without hesitation. True to his word, Mike arrived 10 minutes later, a concerned look on his face. We sat on the porch, and I told him everything. He listened quietly, nodding occasionally, his expression serious. "Man, that's rough," he said when I finished. "I'm sorry you're going through this." "I don't know what to do, Mike," I admitted, feeling a lump in my throat. "I love her, but I can't keep living like this." Mike sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Have you thought about talking to a lawyer? Just to see what your options are?" I nodded. "Yeah, I've thought about it. I don't want to tear the family apart." "John, the family's already torn apart," Mike said gently. "You need to think about what's best for you and the kids." He was right, of course. I knew that, but knowing it and accepting it were two different things. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the situation hanging over us. "You'll get through this, John," Mike said finally, clapping me on the shoulder. "You're stronger than you think." I nodded, grateful for his support. "Thanks, Mike. I don't know what I'd do without you." "Anytime, buddy," he replied with a small smile. "And remember, you don't have to do this alone." Later that evening, I sat down with Emily. The kids were at a neighbor's house for a sleepover, giving us a much-needed privacy. "Emily, we need to talk about the future," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "We can't keep going like this. It's not fair to the kids." She looked at me, her eyes softening for the first time in days. "I know, John. I know. I've been thinking," I continued, "about talking to a lawyer, just to see what our options are." Emily nodded slowly. I think that's a good idea. We need to figure out a way to do this that minimizes the impact on the kids. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. It was a small step, but it was something. We sat in silence for a while, the enormity of the situation sinking in. "John," Emily said softly, breaking the silence, "I want you to know that I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at her, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "I know, Emily, but we can't change what's happened. We can only move forward." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I just hope we can find a way to be happy. All of us." "Me too," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "Me too." As I went to bed that night, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't going to be easy, but at least we were taking steps to move forward. For the first time in weeks, I felt like there was a light at the end of the tunnel, and that was something to hold on to. The decision to consult a lawyer weighed heavily on me. It felt like an admission of failure, like the last nail in the coffin of my marriage. But I knew it was necessary. Emily and I needed to figure out a way to move forward for the sake of our kids, and we couldn't do it alone. I called the law office recommended by Mike and set up an appointment. The day of the meeting, my nerves were shot. I could barely concentrate at work, and I felt a constant knot in my stomach. By the time I arrived at the lawyer's office, I was a mess of anxiety. "Good afternoon, Mr. Johnson." The receptionist greeted me with a warm smile. "Please have a seat. Mr. Reynolds will be with you shortly." I nodded and took a seat, my mind racing with all the possible outcomes. Would I lose custody of the kids? Would Emily try to take everything? The unknowns were overwhelming. Mr. Johnson, a tall man with a kind face and graying hair, stepped into the waiting area. "I'm Tom Reynolds. Please, come in." I followed him into a small, tidy office and sat down, feeling like I was in a daze. "So, John," he began, leaning forward, "tell me what's going on." I took a deep breath and started explaining everything. Emily's affair, her desire for an open relationship, the impact on our family. Tom listened intently, taking notes and occasionally nodding. "Well, it sounds like you're in a tough spot," he said after I finished. "But the good news is, you have options. California is a no-fault divorce state, which means you don't have to prove wrongdoing to file for divorce." "But what about the kids?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I don't want to lose them." Tom nodded. "Custody is always a tricky issue, but the courts typically favor joint custody unless there are extenuating circumstances. It sounds like you've been a devoted father, and that will work in your favor." We spent the next hour discussing the legal aspects of divorce, custody, property division, support. It was overwhelming, but Tom was patient and thorough, explaining everything in terms I could understand. "Take some time to think about it," he advised as we wrapped up. "You don't have to make any decisions today. Just know that you have support and options." I left the office feeling a mix of relief and dread. The path ahead was daunting, but at least I had a roadmap. That night, I sat down with Emily to discuss what I had learned. "Emily, we need to talk about the lawyer," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. The kids were watching TV in the living room, and I didn't want them to overhear. "Okay," she replied, sitting down at the kitchen table. "What did he say?" "He explained the process and our options," I said, taking a seat across from her. "He thinks we should aim for joint custody, which means sharing time with the kids equally." Emily nodded slowly. "I think that's fair. I want them to have both of us in their lives." I sighed, feeling a wave of relief. "Good. I'm glad we agree on that." We talked for a while longer, discussing the logistics of splitting our time with the kids and the possibility of selling the house. It was a difficult conversation, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like we were making progress. As the days passed, I found myself adjusting to the new reality. I started spending more time with the kids, taking them to the park, helping with homework, and trying to be the best dad I could be. It wasn't easy, but their smiles and laughter made it all worthwhile. One evening, as I was tucking Lily into bed, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes. "Daddy, are you and Mommy going to be okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. I felt a lump in my throat. "We're going to be okay, sweetheart," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Things are going to be different, but we both love you very much, and we'll always be here for you. Promise," she whispered, holding out her pinky. "Pinky promise," I replied, linking my pinky with hers. As I left her room, I felt a surge of determination. No matter what happened between Emily and me, I was going to make sure our kids felt loved and secure. Over the next few weeks, Emily and I continued to work through the details of our separation. We met with the lawyer several more times, each meeting bringing us closer to a resolution. It was painful and exhausting, but we both knew it was the right thing to do. One Saturday afternoon, while the kids were playing in the backyard, Emily and I sat down to finalize our plans. "John," she began, her voice soft, "I want to thank you for being so understanding through all of this. I know it hasn't been easy." I nodded, feeling a mix of emotions. "I just want what's best for the kids, Emily, and for us. We deserve to be happy, even if it's not together." She smiled sadly. "I hope we can still be friends, for their sake." "Me too," I replied, meaning it. "It's going to be a long road, but I think we can do it." As we signed the final papers, I felt a sense of closure. It wasn't the ending I had imagined, but it was a new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. The finality of signing the divorce papers hung over me like a fog, but life doesn't pause for personal turmoil. Monday morning, I found myself back at the construction site, trying to lose myself in the work. The rhythm of hammering and drilling was oddly therapeutic, grounding me in the present. "Hey John, you okay?" Mike asked during our lunch break. He was sitting on the tailgate of his truck, unwrapping a sandwich. I nodded, taking a swig of water. "Yeah, just processing everything, you know." Mike nodded sympathetically. "If you need to talk, you know where to find me." "Thanks, man. I appreciate it," I said, grateful for his support. Work kept me busy, but the evenings were a different story. The house was eerily quiet without Emily's presence, even though the kids filled it with their chatter and laughter. We had decided to alternate weeks with the children, and it was my week. The first night alone, after putting the kids to bed, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, vacations, birthdays, ordinary moments that now felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Determined not to drown in nostalgia, I started picking up new routines. I signed up for a parenting group, figuring it would be good for both me and the kids. The first meeting was a mix of anxiety and relief. It was comforting to see other parents dealing with their own struggles, and I realized I wasn't alone. One evening, after dropping the kids off at Emily's for her week, I decided to visit my sister Karen. She had been a constant support, always checking in and offering to help with the kids. "Hey, big bro." She greeted me with a hug when I arrived. "Come on in." I made lasagna. We settled into her cozy living room, and the aroma of baked cheese and tomato sauce filled the air. As we ate, I felt a sense of normalcy that I had been missing. "How are things with Emily?" she asked cautiously. "We signed the papers," I replied, pushing my food around on the plate. It's over." Karen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, John. I know this is hard. Yeah, I said, my voice barely a whisper, but I think it's for the best. We were just hurting each other. Karen nodded, understanding. You're doing the right thing for you and the kids. And remember, you don't have to go through this alone. After dinner, we sat on her porch, the cool evening breeze a welcome contrast to the day's heat. So, have you thought about what's next? She asked, handing me a beer. Not really, I admitted, just trying to get through each day. You'll figure it out, Karen said with confidence. You've always been strong, even if you don't see it. Her words stuck with me as I drove home. Maybe I was stronger than I realized. Maybe this was a chance to rebuild, not just for the kids, but for myself. A few days later, during a particularly rough night, I received a text from Mike. Mike, game night at my place tomorrow. You in? I hesitated. The idea of socializing felt daunting, but I knew I needed to break out of my isolation. John, sure. What time? Mike, 7 p.m. Be there or be square. The next evening, I found myself at Mike's house, surrounded by familiar faces. We played cards, joked around, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of normalcy. The laughter and camaraderie were a balm to my wounded spirit. Glad you came, Mike said, clapping me on the back as I was leaving. We're here for you, John. Thanks, Mike. It means a lot, I replied, feeling a genuine smile spread across my face. The following week, I had the kids again. Determined to make the most of our time together, I planned a weekend camping trip. The kids were thrilled, and their excitement was contagious. Daddy, can we roast marshmallows? Jack asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. Of course, buddy, I replied, ruffling his hair. We're going to have a blast. As we set up the tent and gathered wood for the campfire, I realized how important these moments were. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being present. That night, as we sat around the campfire roasting marshmallows and telling stories, I felt a sense of peace. The kids' laughter, the crackling of the fire, the star-filled sky. It was a reminder that life goes on, and happiness can be found in the simplest of moments. When we returned home, the kids were exhausted but happy. As I tucked them into bed, Lily hugged me tightly. I love you, Daddy, she said, her voice sleepy. I love you too, sweetheart, I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me. As I closed her bedroom door, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it. I had my kids, my family, and my friends. And maybe, just maybe, I had the strength to rebuild my life. The days turned into weeks, and gradually, life began to feel more manageable. The routine of work and parenting was stabilizing, and the overwhelming sadness that once clouded my mind started to lift, if only slightly. One afternoon, while the kids were with Emily, I decided to meet with my lawyer, Janet, to discuss the custody arrangements. I had been dreading this meeting, but it was necessary. John, we need to go over the proposed custody schedule, Janet said, flipping through her notes. Emily is suggesting alternating weeks, but she also wants flexibility for her work trips. I sighed, the thought of Emily's unpredictable schedule frustrating me. I want stability for the kids. They need a routine. Janet nodded. I agree. Let's push for a set schedule with minimal disruptions. The court will prioritize what's best for the children. As we wrapped up the meeting, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. This was uncharted territory for me, but knowing Janet was on my side gave me confidence. That evening, as I was making dinner, my phone buzzed with a message from Emily. Emily, can we talk about the custody schedule? I think we can find a compromise. John, sure. When? Emily, Tonight after the kids go to bed. When she arrived, we sat at the kitchen table, the same place where so many family decisions had been made. This time, it felt different, more businesslike. I know this isn't easy for either of us, Emily began, her voice softer than I expected. But I think we need to do what's best for Lily, Jack, and Emma. I agree, I replied, trying to keep my emotions in check. They need stability. Alternating weeks is fine, but we need to stick to it as much as possible. Emily nodded. Okay, let's try it for a few months and see how it goes. We can adjust if needed. All right, I said, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Thank you for being reasonable about this. The conversation felt like a small victory, a step toward finding a new normal. After she left, I sat in the quiet of the house, realizing how far I had come in the past few months. There were still challenges ahead, but I was starting to see a path forward. One weekend, during my time with the kids, we decided to visit a local park. The weather was perfect, and the park was bustling with families enjoying the day. As we played on the swings and slides, I felt a deep sense of contentment. "Daddy, watch me," Emma shouted as she climbed the jungle gym, her little face beaming with pride. "I see you, sweetheart. You're doing great," I called back, my heart swelling with love. Later, as we sat on a picnic blanket eating sandwiches, Lily looked up at me and asked, "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" Her question caught me off guard, but I knew it was important to reassure her. "Yes, Lily, we're going to be just fine. We have each other, and that's what matters." Jack chimed in, "Can we do this every weekend?" I smiled. "We'll come as often as we can, buddy. I promise." As the sun began to set, we packed up and headed home. The kids were tired but happy, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was what mattered, these moments of joy and connection. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything. The journey had been tough, but I was starting to see the strength within myself. I was learning to navigate this new life, one step at a time. The following week, I attended another parenting group meeting. It had become a valuable support system, and I found comfort in sharing my experiences and hearing others' stories. One of the group members, Sarah, shared a piece of advice that resonated with me. "Focus on what you can control," she said. "There will always be things outside your control, but your attitude and actions are within your power." Her words stuck with me, and I made a conscious effort to apply them in my daily life. I focused on being present for my kids, taking care of myself, and finding moments of joy in the small things. As the months passed, I began to feel more confident in my role as a single parent. The kids were adjusting well, and we were finding our rhythm. I even started exploring new hobbies, like cooking and hiking, finding solace in these activities. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I received a call from Mike. "Hey, John, a few of us are going hiking this weekend. You should come," he said. I hesitated for a moment, then replied, "That sounds great. Count me in." The hike was invigorating, both physically and mentally. Surrounded by nature and good friends, I felt a sense of peace and clarity. It was a reminder that life goes on, and there is beauty to be found in every step forward. As we reached the summit and looked out over the expansive view, Mike turned to me and said, "You're doing great, John. Keep moving forward." His words echoed in my mind as we made our way back down the trail. I realized that I had come a long way from that first day of discovering Emily's betrayal. There was still a road ahead, but I was no longer walking it alone. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. We had faced challenges, but we had also found strength and resilience. Our journey was far from over, but we were moving forward together. If you found the story interesting, please subscribe to the channel, press the bell, and don't forget to give us a like. Thanks for watching. See you all soon.